The morning of February 16th began like any other sleepy Saturday in the Detroit suburb of Keego Harbor. Neighbors emerged in bathrobes to grab their morning papers, expecting nothing out of the ordinary in their cozy community of 3,300 residents. But in one picturesque home on Cass Lake Road, a heart wreath adorned the front door, concealing an unimaginable scene of horror behind its welcoming facade. As neighbors went about their morning routines, just beyond that wreath, 45-year-old Lauren Stewart lay dead at the base of her stairs, a pistol by her side and an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Even more devastating, her husband Dan, 47, their daughter Bethany, 24, and son Stephen, 27 all lay lifeless in various rooms of the house, each methodically shot and killed by Lauren herself. The first signs of alarm came when Lauren's cousin Nicole arrived for a planned get-together that morning. Ringing the bell and knocking repeatedly without answer, her concern mounted. Nicole noticed Lauren's car parked out front in the driveway, now covered under a fresh blanket of overnight snow. Peering through the windows, everything inside seemed orderly and in place, counters wiped down, picture frames precisely centered, not a thing out of the ordinary. But strangely, Lauren wasn't responding. At 9:53 a.m., Nicole placed a worried call to the police department requesting a welfare check. Responding officers approached the charming suburban home marked with that incongruous welcome wreath. Their knocks and demands for entry were met with eerie silence. Police enlisted the fire department to force their way inside. Across the threshold, an apparently normal scene deepened their unease, until a fearful shout went up from the basement, "Get your gun out, there's a dead dog in the tub." Rushing downstairs, investigators discovered the family's dog submerged in a watery death. Adrenaline spiking, officers swept each room only to reveal layer upon layer of sickening discoveries: the couple's 27-year-old son Stephen laying dead on the upstairs floor, expertly shot through the head. In another room, 24-year-old daughter Bethany still resting in her bed, shotgun blast through the pillow she cradled. Husband Dan was found crumpled on the basement level, cut down attempting to escape the same fate. And sprawled at the foot of the stairs with a self-inflicted head wound laid Lauren Stewart herself. Near the body, investigators uncovered 2 handwritten notes, including a suicide letter describing Lauren's tortured mental state in her own words. Phrases jumped out: "I allowed evil into my heart when I chose not to accept God's free love. I killed my family because I know my death would stumble them. At least now they will not suffer." For Detective Tim Donnellan, one of the first responders on scene, the discoveries defied comprehension. "I've seen lots of gruesome crime scenes, but nothing prepared me for what I saw that day," Donnellan later recalled. "It took a while just processing the magnitude of it all. Even longtime police officers could scarcely wrap their minds around how this wife and mother could commit such an unfathomable act." Calling it Cellar of Horrors, shock news headlines soon flashed word of the crime across Michigan and beyond. In the coming days, more details emerged about Lauren Stewart's descent into unfathomable violence against her own family. As investigators dug deeper into the family's history, they uncovered religious differences, shunning from the Jehovah's Witness Church, and suspicions of untreated mental illness, all potentially simmering beneath the surface. But on first encounter, even seasoned police veterans were left reeling at the carnage revealed behind the cozy facade of that suburban home. The heart wreath remained affixed to the door, its symbolism now chillingly ironic, marking not a loving family home, but a residence of death which held the collapsed dreams of an entire family within its walls. One question loomed for all who learned of this tragedy: how could such darkness descend within a seemingly normal middle-class family? What torment could have possibly possessed loving mother Lauren Stewart to annihilate those dearest to her with such cold calculation? Uncovering those answers would mean peeling back the layers of an outwardly picture-perfect family life to reveal the cracks and fissures where tragedy took root. To all outward appearances, Lauren Stewart lived an enviable life as a devoted wife and mother. But few knew the private anguish behind her picture-perfect facade, one ultimately warped into inconceivable violence against those she loved most. Lauren's story began in Detroit in 1973, raised in a stringent religious tradition as one of 12 children. Her mother, Faith, belonged to the Jehovah's Witnesses, a Christian sect marked by strict codes of conduct rooted in unique interpretations of Scripture. Adherents believed they alone practiced true Christianity, considering all other factions as misguided at best. As a girl, Lauren embraced the polarizing faith that shaped every aspect of life. The church dictated not only spiritual belief, but also lifestyle, forbidding things like holidays, political involvement, and socializing outside the group. Leaving the religion or violating its rules meant being shunned and cut off even by one's own family. Lauren accepted these conditions as normal, steeped in the teachings that Armageddon was imminent and only Jehovah's Witnesses would survive to paradise. At age 13, Lauren experienced her first major trauma when Faith died unexpectedly. The loss deepened her involvement with the congregation that became her sole support system. She continued living under her father's roof alongside her many siblings, finding security in the rigid faith structure. As a smart but shy teen, Lauren vied for her elders' approval by joyfully volunteering to preach door to door. At 21, she married Dan Stewart, a fellow Jehovah's Witness ready to start a family within the insular community. The newlyweds were soon the model of a perfect religious couple, welcoming 2 children, Stephen and Bethany, and rising to leadership positions, guiding newer members. Behind closed doors, though, Lauren battled lifelong bouts of anxiety and depression. The exhausting workload of mothering 2 young children only amplified her struggles. She leaned more heavily on Faith for her role as family anchor, even as nagging doubts took root. Troubling questions eventually fractured the Stewarts' spiritual certainty. College was forbidden, but Dan saw brighter prospects for Stephen and Bethany with higher education. Other conflicting priorities also emerged. Lauren yearned to return to work while Dan traveled constantly for software conferences. And the restrictiveness of their social circle increasingly wore thin. By 2013, the family agreed their needs diverged too sharply from official teachings. They hungered for personal freedom denied by tenets Lauren once fervently defended. In short, the belief system engulfing their whole lives no longer aligned with their goals as individuals. After agonizing debates, Dan and Lauren chose to leave the faith that defined them, hoping to retain personal relationships despite the grave act of dissent. But the backlash was immediate and devastating. Old friends cut off all contact, while Lauren's own father ceased communication entirely. Once treasured as church VIPs, now they were branded dangers to true believers. In their small community of Kigo Harbor, where witnesses dominated, public encounters morphed into exercises in cruelty. Former friends averted their eyes walking past Lauren in the grocery store or made cutting remarks just within her earshot. "Look, sisters, an unbeliever. Their poor children will suffer for their parents' sins." Lauren's emotional landscape cratered under this merciless shunning by those once considered family. She redoubled focus on external appearances, glamorous social media profiles, and modeling headshots belying her torment. Even landing fitness gigs failed to resolve an increasingly contradictory interior existence. Outwardly pretty, vivacious mom thriving in the secular world, but inwardly spiraling into obsessive darkness over her now evil status among lifelong friends and relatives. Dan and the kids seemed to adjust more smoothly to post-witness life. But for Lauren, losing that community was a trauma, leaving her fundamentally unmoored. Such utterly severed human ties are emotionally devastating. Studies show even losing one key relationship doubles mortality risk. Lauren lost her entire world. Late nights morphed into rabbit holes of religious conspiracy theories, rambling journal entries devolved into deranged focus on demons and violent end times. Once merely melancholic with bouts of depression, Lauren now slipped into true clinical instability. Financial stress compounded the crisis. After years hiding it, Lauren confessed they teetered on bankruptcy, over $100,000 in debt from splurges trying to numb her anguish. Now forced to sell their home and vehicles just to salvage family stability. So as 2018 dawned, Lauren was isolated, unemployed, and essentially homeless, her marriage under colossal strain with a husband often traveling, troubled kids, and no friends or family to lean on as she once did. To outsiders, she maintained her facade. That enviable lifestyle masked Lauren's crashing interior reality. But long before that February night when she shattered her family's future forever, warning signs of impending disaster glimmered for those who cared to see. If only she'd found support to make sense of her unraveling world before all was lost. February 2018 marked Lauren Stewart's final descent from a troubled woman into a killer set on annihilating all she loved. In her last months alive, Lauren withdrew ever deeper into the dark recesses of a mind coming undone. The warning signs were glaring, but no one connected the dots before fateful violence erupted. Lauren's searches grew more disturbing, late nights scouring websites on lethal weapons and suicide techniques, posting unhinged religious rants on social media. Her family noticed only increasing isolation. Soon a weapon entered the home without anyone's knowledge. Lauren legally purchased a 9mm Glock handgun from a local arms dealer, likely using her fitness training credentials. The act itself wasn't wholly illegal, but combined with clear instability, it paved the way for unfathomable tragedy. In her spiral towards madness, Lauren stockpiled ammunition she tested for maximum damage. One box was enough to end 5 lives. She researched shooting methods and plotted an intricately cruel sequence: who must die first to enable killing the rest. It was the depth of manipulation in Lauren's plan that chilled those later learning her process. She lured loved ones unwittingly into her homicidal schemes, exploiting their trust before executing them in cold blood. The first calculated steps came February 5th. Lauren videotaped her first apparent suicide message full of rambling religious justification. She asked God to care for her orphaned children when she was gone. It was the first glimpse into a conscience wrapped in profound delusion. 10 days later, on February 15th, Lauren's plan lurched forward. She sent a text from Dan's phone to his boss, an ominous sign in retrospect. "Mark, this is Lauren. Dan had an accident this morning and died. I can't talk now. Someone will give you details later." If the recipient had any inkling of Dan's intact status just hours earlier, perhaps he would have sounded an alarm. But instead, the chill between Jehovah's Witness families kept that life-saving check from ever occurring. Lauren continued playing her deadly chess match. She lured 24-year-old daughter Bethany home for the night, feigning a celebration dinner. Lauren knew Bethany's boyfriend had just deployed with the Navy. She'd be returning to an empty house. Under the guise of keeping her company, Lauren ensured her own daughter would be there to kill. Once Bethany was asleep in her childhood room, Lauren descended to the basement and her cowering husband Dan. Perhaps he realized in those final moments that the wife and religious partner he'd known long vanished, leaving only this soulless replica in her wake. A pillow muffled his execution. Next, Lauren crept back upstairs and stole the last moments of her only daughter's life as she slept. Police later stood over Bethany's bed with its pink pillowcase inexplicably concealing the bloody evidence of a contact shotgun blast through the young woman's skull. Lauren crossed over fully into the persona of a monstrous stranger when she lured 27-year-old Stephen back home that evening too. Her scheming manipulation knew no bounds, even forcing her eldest child to dig his own grave in service of her horrifying agenda. Like his helpless father and sister before, Stephen's murder was carried out in merciless efficiency before he could even face his killer. In the span of 15 hours, Lauren Stewart slaughtered half her family plus her own humanity in the process. By the time she trained the Glock's barrel on herself around 10 p.m. that night, she was but a shell, the loving mother and wife who once resided within long since deadened beyond recognition. To see Lauren cradling a meal-prepped freezer and a cheerful balloon display intended for Bethany's birthday party the next week was to witness the depth of madness overtaking her soul. Nothing of that creative, lively woman remained, only the ruins of a broken mind incapable of reconciling sinister impulses with the family life she was systematically dismantling. In the end, it seemed Lauren's tormented psyche could only rationalize escape by erasing anything she'd ever loved or cherished. But nothing could erase the brutal ripples her actions unleashed for generations of survivors forever scarred by the nightmares she manifested on that quiet suburban street. In the aftermath of unthinkable tragedy, those left behind desperately seek explanation amidst the ruin. What possible confluence of factors could transform a pillar of the community into a merciless killer, one who methodically executes her entire family in cold blood? In the case of Lauren Stewart's psychotic break ending in quadruple murder-suicide, complex threads woven through a lifetime ultimately unraveled her psyche from the inside out. Only by untangling and examining those volatile strands can we glean any semblance of understanding around such a devastating outcome. First, there is the high-control religious culture embedding itself as Lauren's singular reality from birth until she was 40 years old. As a fourth-generation Jehovah's Witness, obedience to the draconian demands of Watchtower leaders was synonymous with loyalty to God Himself. When the Stewarts considered leaving the fold, it wasn't simply switching congregations or liberalizing their politics. They faced exile from the only belief system and social fabric they'd ever known. Losing one's entire culture often leaves psychic wounds and a fractured sense of self requiring tremendous adaptation. But intense indoctrination conditioned Lauren against seeking help from worldly sources. Thus, she lacked skills to healthily process immense grief over her severed community ties. In serious cult abuse cases, manipulative groups actively rewire a follower's identity for total dependence, inhibiting autonomy. Lauren's suicidal ideation after leaving signals the depth of that conditioning. Without the group as her anchor, deeper issues overwhelmed her. The shunning that followed seems itself a form of emotional abuse, with Cecile J.W. Janssens of Ghent University explaining the Zeist congregation's actions as a psychological curtain. You go deeper and deeper into isolation. Scores of studies reveal healthier options like talk therapy actually rewire neural pathways, much like indoctrination. But withdrawing cult programming without replacing it risks leaving a vacuum where identity and purpose once existed. Accessible mental health resources could have bombed Lauren's wounds following her faith transition. But an archaic sense of others' judgments likely barred her from seeking counseling, despite severe depression. Secondly, Lauren's own adverse childhood experiences may have amplified her vulnerability. Trauma from losing her mother so young or alleged abuse by a relative compounded the challenges of adjusting to life after Watchtower. Unaddressed PTSD can substantially increase risk for everything from chronic illness to suicide. Again, intervention avenues existed which might have equipped Lauren to process traumatic memories in healthier ways before they consumed her. Support groups have accomplished wonders by helping members contextualize experiences, grieve loss, and reconnect to community. Third and most critically, Louisiana's trajectory demonstrates the vital need restricting firearm access during mental health crises. Lauren's history and actions clearly exhibited severe illness, whether major depression, psychotic disorder, or otherwise. Her cache of ammunition and online footprint unveiled detailed planning indicating she should not have had ready access to weapons in that fragile state if proper safeguards existed. Here, legislative solutions around gun ownership like ERPO laws allowing temporary confiscation of firearms when someone demonstrates threat could have saved lives if awareness, concern, and initiative aligned to activate them from those who witnessed Lauren's decline. Finally, potent stigma around mental illness likely barred friends or family from intervening with life-saving intensity. Outdated associations of madness or violence keep many from speaking out for their own loved ones, enabling further harm. Restructuring social perspectives on psychiatric crisis is crucial for prevention. Compassion paired with accountability can nurture healing where silence and isolation breed destruction. Shared understanding must reinforce that acknowledging struggles and seeking help are never signs of weakness, but rather of courage and wisdom. The convergence forming an eventual perfect storm powerful enough to destroy everything Lauren Stewart held dear warrants deep reflection. Perhaps in reckoning honestly with such loss, space emerges for sowing more positive seeds moving forward. We might envision communities where belonging doesn't demand conformity, escalating crises, where ancient trauma finally receives the light of awareness, granting it less tyrannical power over sufferers' lives, where weaponry designed for mass violence no longer abides in homes overcome by turmoil. And maybe most essentially, we can manifest a society responsive enough to intercept all signs of suffering in people like Lauren, with support instantaneous and barrier-free regardless of stigma or circumstance. Places where speaking openly about mental health marks not a scandal, but simply our shared station along the winding spectrum of the human condition. Uprooting the seeds giving rise to one family's unspeakable pain does nothing to resuscitate precious lives lost. But it may just nourish the soil where empathy and wisdom now take root to aid other families back from the brink. Perhaps that alone offers some semblance of meaning amidst the ashes of senseless tragedy.